you're here for the next 3 years, which is amazing. They welcomed me, and it's been great. So during that time, I kind of really wanted to bring the Denville Museum and Historical Society, kind of up to speed technologically wise, and just kind of get us known in a get us known in the community a little bit more, and have people realize that we're there and we're always there if anyone needs help. So um, that's kind of how this whole thing started, I guess. And in the book Denville 13 was never really supposed to be a book. It wasn't even supposed to be something that I was going to research. Quite frankly, it all happened more or less by accident. So what I'll do is I'll actually share a presentation with you guys, and I think you'll still be able to see me while I see the presentation. A few things. So there's a few things in this presentation that did not make it to the book. So if there is any super young people, I do have a picture here of the body. I have kind of an edited picture of the boys that are involved. So there's definitely things in this presentation I'm going to show you guys today that are not in the book. So I just kind of wanted to give you a little heads up and a little warning that some of the stuff that you may see may potentially be a little graphic in nature. So, and I'll talk about as to why I chose not to use it and why I chose not to put it in a book. So let's get going. Let's see. I'm going to go, let's go here. And let me do share screen. Screen 2. Awesome. Do you guys see it? Awesome. All right. So hopefully that works. So Denville 13, the story of Denville 13, more or less started when I was doing research for Denville Denville during World War II. So this is actually a picture of downtown Denville in World War II. It's one that I actually came across that I haven't seen before that much. There's a lot that we have seen, and this was kind of one that we haven't that much. But I was doing interviews. Initially started as about a year and a half ago, I wrote a book for the Historical Society on Denville in World War I. And the president at the time, Judy McBride, who has since passed, kind of suggested to me that, you know what, Pete, you should go and do a book on World War II in Denville. And I said, it's a great idea. And she goes, you got to get your butt moving before these guys are gone. So get out there and start interviewing. And I said, okay, let's do it. So I started making kind of rounds and calling a lot of people, a lot of whoever I could just throughout town, to try to get in touch with anyone that lived in Denville during 1940s. So that was the main impetus behind all this. And I started interviewing a lot of folks that lived in Denville during 1940s, regardless of whether they were veterans. I did interview veterans, and but also people that just lived here. And as I was doing these interviews and collecting all my data and all my information about World War II, a lot of these older folks started mentioning to me, Peter, there was this really bad murder that happened in 1950s. And I kind of brushed it off because that was not my intent. So, I was very much like, oh, that's great. Thank you so much. But like, let's talk about rationing, in World War II, because that's really what I was interested in. And, as I kept on doing these interviews, it kept on coming up. It was always the older folks that are like, there's this murder and there's this murder. And I'm like, okay, it seemed like a lot of people wanted to tell me something, but then they didn't want to tell me something. So I was very much, kind of intrigued at that point. So I did what everybody else would do in 21st century. I went online and I started Googling it. And I said Denville murder 1950s and Denville murder 1950, 1951, 52. I ran through all the years possible and nothing popped up. Interestingly enough, ever since my book was announced that it was going to come out, now if you Google Denville 13 or Denville murder, one lone article from New York Times pops up. However, that article is locked unless you have a subscription. But when I was doing this, about a year ago, over a year ago, year and a half ago, nothing came up. Each year, I was like, okay, well, maybe this doesn't exist. So what I did is I spoke to Vito, the president of the Historical Society, and I said, hey, a lot of these guys are telling me about this murder, and he suggested I go upstairs and look in one of the files of the museum. Bob Illig, who was, some of you might have known him, he was a freelance historian in Denville in the 70s and 80s. and he actually collected a lot of information on Denville. And what he would do is he created these scrapbooks where he would cut out these articles and just kind of put them in a scrapbook. So I went through these folders of his, and like Vito pointed out, there actually was an article about this murder that was cut out, but it did not say what newspaper it came from. It did not say what date it was. It was very like crudely cut out, but it gave me some names and something to go off of. So the natural place to look at, I kind of paused my World War II research, and the natural place to look at was the Denville Herald newspaper. So the Denville Herald newspaper was published in Denville from 1931 till about 1956. And we actually have a PDF of that. Thank you to the Denville Library, actually. So for letting me use that. So Siobhan, if you're there, thank you. But I started looking through the Denville PDF, and we have pretty much 20 something odd years of it. We're missing one full year, which is all completely missing, and everything else was there. So as I started scanning through it, and it was such a crude copy, I couldn't even just do a search option. I had to actually go through them. And as I went through them, interestingly enough, I realized that the entire file, what was missing in that file was 3 pages of the first week of September issue from 1953, which I thought was odd that we have every newspaper for 25 years and we're missing 3 pages of one particular date. And that kind of got me thinking, all right, so maybe the cutout article that was at the museum came from this paper. So what I did is I actually looked at the microfilm. We had the microfilm that was photographed of all these newspapers in 1970s. So I powered up the microfilm machine, which I had by then. I don't remember how to use one. So it was a lot of YouTubing on how to use a microfilm machine. But I powered up the microfilm machine. I found the proper year, 1953. I looked through it. As I was scrolling through the roll, I realized that the entire issue of the first week of September was never photographed in 1970s when this was, cataloged. And I thought that was odd. So now I'm really intrigued. So I couldn't Google anything. There was nothing on the internet. I can't find this one newspaper. So luckily we actually have at the Denville Museum, we actually have the real papers. Someone meticulously collected them and donated them in these crates. And sure enough, we have a 1953. There's a whole box of all newspapers from 1953. So I felt like, I'm going to get whoever's trying to hide this. So I went through this whole box, and believe it or not, that entire issue is missing. It doesn't exist. Actually, I still have not found it as of today. The Denville Herald printed about 1,000 copies each week, which means that somehow 1,000 copies of that issue have disappeared in the past 70 years. Meanwhile, we have record and physical copies of most of the other ones, which was very, very interesting, to say the least. So what happened here? Essentially, at that point, I kind of didn't want to be deterred. I was like, all right, well, let's keep on searching. So again, I went and spoke to Vito at the museum, and we kind of brought it up at the board meeting. What should we do with this? Should I continue looking into it? And the board was like, yeah, go for it. History's history. Just see what you can find. So I reached out to the Morristown Historical Society, Morris County Historical Society, and eventually they led me to Morristown Library, which has hard copies of the Morristown Daily Record. And it was never scanned. They have the actual copies. And so I went through those copies, and I've kind of had an idea. It must have happened in September. And sure enough, I found articles about the event. And the articles, I realized that the ones we had at the museum, they came from the Denville Record. And as I was looking through it, they actually covered this murder for 2 weeks straight, every single day, front page news. And the way they covered it in the 50s is something that, to me, was very odd. Like, I didn't think that would definitely would not fly today. But the way they covered it was that they literally had pictures of all these guys that were involved in this murder front page. I mean, it was literally front page of the newspaper, which I thought was odd because a lot of them were minors. And so being minors, I thought to myself, like, that would never really fly today. But back then, not only did they have the kids' names, they had their pictures, they had their addresses, they had their parents' addresses, parents' place of work. I mean, the newspaper just went all out. But now I had a better idea of, at least from that standpoint, of what happened. So the next step was I contacted the Morris County Prosecutor's Office. And I contacted them using the OPRA, which is Open Public Relations. You could essentially apply to have files opened. We're all entitled to it as citizens. So I applied for it through the OPRA, and they gave me the entire file. So I was the first person to look at that file since 1953 when it was closed. And they sent me autopsy reports, pictures, statements from all of these, all the kids involved. They send me transcripts from the courts. I mean, they send me everything. And at that point, I kind of felt a little overwhelmed because for those of you that have read it or will read it, it's a pretty intense story to say the least. And I didn't know what to do with that. And I was kind of discussing it with some members of the board, Denville Historical Society. And I was told, go for it, just keep on researching and keep on writing. So I did. So I wrote it. And the initial intent here, when I wrote it, was to just leave it in a binder at the museum. That was the initial intent. So when I finished this, I finished this book, which you guys have, or some of you might have. I finished the book, and then I went right back to doing World War II research. Like, that was always the intent, was to talk about World War II. And as it was sitting in a binder, we kind of started talking about it with Vito, and he's like, you know what, maybe it's time. And I felt like I got a lot of, as negative of a story as this is, and I'm going to tell you obviously the story in a second, there is so much good ultimately that comes out of it, I think, for our town, that I felt like maybe this was a story that should be told. So I sent it out to History Press and Arcadia Publishing. They're kind of merged together, and not really thinking anything of it. And an editor got back to me, and they said they loved the story, and they think they love the message in the story, and they want to publish it. So at that point, when we were talking about contract issues and stuff, I didn't want to use any last names. So off the bat, I said, I'm not going to include certain pictures. And at the same time, I'm not going to use any of the last names of those involved. And the publisher was awesome about it. They're like, sure, that's your prerogative. And the reason for that is because I don't think that was my intent, to expose anyone per se. And I know that if you follow my trail of my research, you could probably find all this information, because it is there. It's all public knowledge. Whatever I reported on in this book, none of it is anything that someone technically, if they did some digging, cannot find on their own. So I guess let's get to the story. So the story itself starts actually in this picture. You can't see it that well, but this is Gardner's Soda Shop. It was also Gardner's Pharmacy in town. It was right on the left side of the Denville Theater. And the story begins in 1953. This story is based off of not just newspaper reports, but also the files that were released by the prosecutor's office. So the boys' statements and so on and so forth. The Denville 13, the name Denville 13, was given to them by the Associated Press. The murder that we're about to talk about actually was the largest indictment for a single murder in all of Americans' history. This was, our little Denville was essentially, once I started really digging, it was front page news in like Los Angeles and, Virginia. I mean, this was national news. So what essentially happens here is in 1953, a man in his early 30s comes into town, Denville. And what I was able to find out from this, through essentially this research, is that this man was previously in jail in a maximum security prison. He was a child molester and a pedophile. He was put in jail for having sex with 13-year-old boys. And then after he served his time, he leaves jail and he comes to Denville, to our quaint little town, 1953 summer. And what he starts to do is he starts to hang out in all the local hangout spots that teenagers hang out in. Primarily, he would hang out in the soda shop, in the movie theater, as well as a beach, a local beach, which was at the time, maybe some of you guys may remember, there was a beach on Savage Road. Right now, there is a volleyball net there in court. That used to actually be a beach to swim in a Rockaway River before I guess we realized that Rockaway River may not be the most pristine water to swim in. Nonetheless, that's kind of where this guy hung out, and he tried to pick up a couple boys that were 14 years old. So the story really starts in this Gardner soda shop right here, and it is a Saturday. It is the last weekend before summer is over, so school starts on Monday. And interesting enough, it is also the first ever Monday at Morris Hills, which was just opening in 2 days' time from this murder. So a lot of the kids involved either went to Morris Hills or they went back to actually Denville Main Street School, because some of them were that young. They were in 8th grade. And at the time, actually, it went to 9th grade at certain points. So anyway, what happens is 4 kids, a couple of them 14-year-olds, one 17 and one 22. The 22 is the only non-teenager in the group of these boys. And while they're at the soda shop, they see this guy come in and try to pick up one of these 14-year-old boys, and they decide that they're going to teach him a lesson. And again, this starts off really as 3 teens and one 22-year-old. And the idea is they kind of hatch this plan that what they're going to do is they're going to try to lure this guy over to one of Denville's lovers lanes. And apparently Denville had quite a few lovers lanes. This lovers lane was actually, and I'll show you guys in a second more or less where it was in the picture, but it's off of Savage Road. If you look at, there's apartments there and it goes to Route 80. Lover's Lane is gone now, by the way, because now Route 80 kind of is there. But so the idea was that they made this plan, and by nighttime there was actually 12 of them, not 13. There was 12. So there was 12 kids by the time this is all said and done. And the plan was very simple. There was going to be one car with teenagers that was going to go to this Lover's Lane, which, imagine, Lover's Lane is an old towpath of a Morse canal. So it's very wooded, and there is just a dirt path that goes through the woods. So it's almost like it closes over, the trees close over this path. So there was one car waiting at the very end of this path with their lights off with a bunch of teenagers. And these 3 kids were selected, 2 were at 14, to bait this guy and try to get him to go to Lover's Lane, where teenagers went to do teenage things, in the 1950s. And they were supposed to go into Lover's Lane. And then the 3rd car with the rest of these teenagers were supposed to pull in behind them and basically kind of lock this guy in there. The main intent was to basically scare him out of town. Based on older reports, none of the kids really set off to say they're going to commit murder that night. This was, hey, we're going to kind of beat this guy up maybe and get him out of town. So the way this kind of starts is this is where this murder takes place. So if you, this map actually that you're looking at here is from 1950s Denville. So some things are a little different now. But if you go in Savage Road, you have the bridge here, you have the cemetery, you have, this is all Gardner Field right now, in this area. And then what you see in yellow was this old towpath of this Morris Canal. Here, right before this car today, is Route 80. Now, interestingly enough, and I'm not saying you should do this because it would be considered trespassing. However, interestingly enough, if you park your car at the apartments, and you actually walk under Route 80, you're going to find the place this happened. It's still there. I discovered it because I decided to go over there. But I think it's state property now. But if you walk under Route 80, you're going to come out and you're actually going to see the remnants of this Lover's Lane, this towpath. It's still kind of hidden there behind it, interestingly enough. So, this entire thing, though, starts right here by this river. Literally, here is the beach where you would see the, today, if you drive by Gardner Field. This was the beach, more or less, what it looked like at the time, at the river. And the plan was that these boys were going to first lure this guy, and he kind of suggested it, that they should go swimming. So he takes two 14-year-olds and one 17-year-old swimming. Meanwhile, the car packed with a few other boys goes down to Lover's Lane, shuts their lights off, and they wait. The third car is parked at Gardner Field, and they are kind of waiting to see what happens. Well, after they go swimming, the 30-year-old man, and by the way, it seemed like he had a lot of money. He drove a nice car. It was a convertible. He was dressed really well, spending a lot of money left and right around town. He suggests that instead of going to Lover's Lane first, he actually suggests to take him to a bar. So he takes these minors to a bar in Rockaway. So he drives out, and while he goes to the bar, he's followed by a car with teenagers. Now, he goes to this bar, which is not planned. That wasn't supposed to happen. And he gets these teenagers drunk. The bartender, was a bar in Rockaway. It doesn't exist anymore. And the bartender actually got in a lot of trouble afterwards as well because he served minors. These guys were 14, a couple of them. And this, this 30-year-old's trying to get them drunk. And not only does he get them drunk, but he actually allows one of them to drive the car back. And he allows them to drive the car back. And now they go into Lover's Lane. But now it's after midnight. So the guys that are waiting there at this towpath have been there for quite a while. So to them, they're kind of getting a little nervous as to what's going on. Well, the man in his car, even though it's a convertible, the top is up. He pulls into Lover's Lane. And at the same time, there's actually a young couple that was pulling into Lover's Lane as well. Saturday night, on to Sunday now, midnight. And they notice that there's a car there. So they're like, oh, I guess this place is taken. So they reverse and they go somewhere else. But it establishes the time as to when all this happened. Also, one of the neighbors on George Street heard more or less what was happening as well. But he thought it was, again, just teenagers doing, crazy teenage things. Anyway, this guy pulls in, and two of the boys, there was three boys with him in a car. Two of the boys step outside. He remains in a car with one of the 14-year-olds. While that is happening, the third car pulls in. But interestingly enough, up to this entire point, there's only 12 boys that are involved. The 13th, I call it the 13th boy. The 13th boy had absolutely nothing to do with this whatsoever. Quite frankly, he was leaving the movie theater that night. And I was trying to kind of figure this out, why they would swing around town. But it's possible that maybe when they were following this guy, he came out of Rockaway, maybe did one more loop through Broadway. But this teenager, who was like 15, 16 at the time, basically walked out of the movie theater after midnight on a Saturday, and he sees a car driving with teenagers. This is 1950s, think of like Elvis times. And he notices that he knows some of these kids. So he flags the car down because he wants a ride home. And he's like, can you guys give me a ride home? And he says, they tell him, fine, but we got to take care of something first. So he's like, yeah, whatever. He hops in a car, and essentially they tell him, like, and I quote, they said, there's this fag, we're going to run him out of town. And this boy doesn't really want anything to do with it. So when they get to Lover's Lane and he realizes what's about to happen, he runs. So he did not plan the actual event. He had nothing to do with it. He simply asked for a ride. He never even stayed for the beating. He ran home. His face was on the front page of a newspaper a week later, as one of the Denville 13. And that was one of the stories that really kind of got me when I was doing this research. Is the number 13 is very misleading. And I think if you read the book, you might get that vibe as well. It really, if anything, it's hard to really pinpoint because we are talking eventually about a murder. But if you're looking at who really did the beating or the murdering part, it really probably was 4, maybe 5 at most out of these 13. About 8 of them, one ran home. The others 8 or 7 kind of stood back, and they were very much aghast as to what was happening. They're like, wait, what's going on? How do we get into this? What's going on? There were teenagers in a wrong place at a wrong time, having made a bad decision at that moment. And while 4 of them are really kind of pushing this guy around, they walk up to his car, and, there's 12 of them. Some are further back, 4 really walk up, and they ask him to get out of the car, and he doesn't want to get out. So what happens is they actually open a door and they pull him out. And it kind of starts into like a shoving match back and forth. And what ultimately happens, someone strikes him first. There's punches being thrown. And one of the boys hands another boy a empty soda bottle from soda, Coca-Cola or Pepsi, whatever. He hands him a bottle. this boy then proceeds to hit this man over the head and over his face with his bottle. If you know, based on the autopsy reports, the man's face was completely bashed in. And you know, so this man basically falls to the ground. They beat him with his bottle. While someone's beating with a bottle, one of the boys that's standing to the side comes up and actually restrains the person. He's like, "Just stop! What are you doing? Like, no, no, no! What are we doing?" And they kind of quickly realize that the man appears to be dead. According to the autopsy, he potentially might not have been dead yet. However, he would have been dead regardless of whether they stayed with him or not. They then actually go through his wallet, and they take his wallet, and everyone kind of disperses. Now, out of the 12 kids, I guess, that are there at that moment, there's two brothers actually, and I found an interesting story about the brothers, based on the reports, is that the younger brother always wanted to hang out with his older brother, and the mom actually yelled at the older brother that morning that summer's almost over, you never take your younger brother anywhere, just let him hang out with you tonight. And you know, and he, you know, he's like, fine, you could come with me. And these two guys are standing really way off to the side, and again, they become part of the Denville 13, which was another reason why I felt like it's almost like our town has been hiding a secret which a lot of people thought they knew, but a lot of people didn't really know what it was, in a sense, of what really transpired. Now, this again is kind of a little graphic, but this is the person that was murdered. This is not in the book, and that is the picture of his body. I was able to get these pictures. Believe it or not, actually, and some of them were published in newspapers, not in our state. I purposely chose not to include these pictures in the book because that was not my intent. But what these boys do is the main four go to Paul's Diner on Route 46 in Mountain Lakes, which is still there today. And what they do is, while they're at the diner, everyone kind of dispersed. They all freaked out. They all dispersed. And the four main ones, there's a couple 14-year-olds in there, the 22-year-olds in there, and they get to this diner, and while they're kind of talking, they're like, oh crap, like that wasn't supposed to happen, you know, we need to just do something, maybe we have to figure this out. What they actually do by accident is they drop the guy's wallet, because they stole his wallet, and they drop his wallet into the booth, like in between the booth seats. It falls out, so they accidentally leave the guy's wallet there. Now, the wallet plays a pretty big role later on in the trial, because if this was a murder with an attempted, theft, then it would be first degree murder, not second degree murder. So there's, it does play a big role later. But these guys accidentally leave the wallet at the diner, which really makes them be caught, more or less. So the main guys decide they're going to drive back and try to do something with the body. Well, by the time they drive back, the body had been found. It was found by a lady that was walking her dog in the morning, and she got her nephew, I think, and they kind of found this body, and they called Chief Jenkins, who was the main chief of police in Denville at the time. Denville really only had three police officers. This is the picture of what this scene looked like in the morning. It's on the back of the cover. Now, you see what this Lover's Lane looked like. Like I said, it was very much trees around, dirt path in the middle, and it's still there, ironically. A lot of people don't know this, even though this is on the cover, on the back cover of the book, but this picture was given to me by the Morris County Prosecutor's Office, and it was redacted because if you notice right here, they actually put a big black blotch on here, which you don't know because it blends in, because you saw the body in this picture. So they actually covered the body up. The boys are all collected quickly. Actually, by within 24 hours or so, every single one of them is brought to the police station and arrested. The rumors go very quickly. Just it spreads like wildfire. The town is completely shocked due to the fact that, like I said, except for one of them, every single one of these boys is a teenager. So as shocking as this may be, it almost takes everyone aback. Like, wait, what just happened? So these boys they're initially all accused of murder. So they're arraigned at the Denville firehouse. There were so many of them that they didn't know where to actually make the trial. So the only place that was available was upstairs from the firehouse, and that's where the trial took place, where they were all essentially officially arrested for and trialed for murder. Now, based on the accounts that I found, they said that the day of the trial, if you think where Acme is today in Denville, and you have the Main Street Schoolhouse across the street, and you have the firehouse, which is there was an old building, but in the same place where the trial took place. They said it was just full of people. Everyone came out to see it. There was a bunch of teenagers outside on bicycles and their parents and people across the street and in the parking lot of what would become A&P. It's like the whole town turned out to see these guys being let in. This is a picture of Paul's Diner at the time when these guys kind of got caught from it. This is the Denville Police Department at the time. It was, I always said it was like three and a half police officers because one was part-time, but this right here is Chief Jenkins all the way to the left. Chief Jenkins is the one that more or less is responsible for kind of cracking, you might say, figuring this crime out. And a lot of it falls on his shoulders because once the Morris County Prosecutor's Office get involved, because this is a murder, they didn't show up to Denville to discuss this with the town, but Chief Jenkins, it kind of fell on his shoulders to explain how this might have happened to everyone in Denville. So this picture did not make it to the book. I purposely chose to exclude it. However, this is the front page of a newspaper. Again, a lot has changed since 1950s. But these are all the boys that are involved. Again, I chose not to use it, and I chose not to use any of their last names. The boys were brought into court in threes. You can see in this picture, they were actually handcuffed in groups of three. And they were kind of paraded in and out of the firehouse. So as I mentioned, they said it was hundreds of people outside watching this. And everyone was just completely and utterly shocked by the fact that something like this could have happened in the small town of Denville. So there's another picture of the boys being brought in. You'll notice that they are handcuffed in threes with their attorneys. The boys, this is the fire department. This is actually a parade in 1950s, but this is what the fire department used to look like. And this upstairs is where the actual trial took place. And this is where it gets kind of interesting for our town. If you read my book kind of has two parts. The first part discusses the crime itself. It talks about what happened and kind of really play by play of what transpired. The second half of the book is really the redemption and forgiveness part of the title of the book, which is kind of the town itself. I try to place this murder in context of American history, 1950s. What did it mean to be a teenager in 1950s? What did it mean to be gay in 1950s? Like the person that was killed. What did it mean to live in a small town in suburbia 1950s? So the book kind of splits, like it's true crime, but then it kind of becomes really like a social commentary on the times, a historical social commentary on the times of small town America. And while these boys are waiting for trial, to be tried at the Morristown courtroom because they're being tried for murder, so it's Morristown Court. It's no longer part of Denville's issue. Denville holds these town meetings. They hold these town meetings in the Denville Community Church. This is what it used to look like. This church is no longer here. This is on Diamond Spring Road. The building behind it is still there. It's now an apartment building, and the post office is right down the street here in case you guys want to know where that is. But this is what it used to look like at the time. And Denville held these meetings. Essentially, I think they held 4 meetings to try to figure out how could this happen in Denville. And the meetings were very much ahead of their time. And it really shows a lot about the community of Denville, at the time, because they brought in psychologists. They brought in police. They brought in teenagers from Morris. Again, Morris Knolls didn't exist yet. So Morris Hills High School. They really wanted to look at the psyche of teenagers, try to figure out and understand their teenagers, which is something that didn't really happen at that time, to try to come to the bottom of this. And ultimately, what transpired at these meetings. And it kind of, as I started digging, Denville at the time was a community of lakes, and it still is a community of lakes. Back then, it was more so known for their lakes. And based on interviews that I've conducted, as well as reading transcripts of what happened at these meetings, these town hall meetings, Denville was very much divided. It was very sectionalist in a sense, based on where you lived and in what lake you lived. And people that lived in one lake didn't get along with people that lived in another lake. It was, you might say that to a certain extent, there's some competition today. But in the 50s, it really seemed like there were such different communities that they try to outdo one another. And, if you lived in Indian Lake, you have the clubhouse, and they would show movies at the clubhouse on weekends for kids. And they had swimming and they had activities. And it was almost, if you belonged to the lake community, you had a certain status in Denville. And that's kind of what a lot of these teenagers try to get across during these meetings to the adults. Like, if you don't belong to a lake community in Denville, you kind of get excluded from Denville in 1953. Well, once I ran all the files and did my research on these 13 kids, not a single one of them belonged to a lake community. None of them did out of the 13, which, considering the number of them, was something to say, because Denville was mostly lakes. And back then, if you did not belong to the lake community, you were viewed as the person that lived on the wrong side of the tracks. You were viewed as someone that doesn't have money, someone that can't belong to a lake community. So there was that kind of came out of this. And at these meetings, and I also thought, this was why I thought it was very important for a town. I didn't realize what an impact this event had on the creation of Denville. During these meetings, it was decided that Denville should be a family-friendly town, that Denville should cater to families and their children, and it should be very inclusive. Doc Gardner, who owned the Gardner soda shop and the pharmacy in town, played a pivotal role after this event in trying to get this old sickle land and get land donated for parks, for recreation, regardless of whether you belong to a lake. Denville should be open for kids and families to have something to do, which is why we have Gardner Field today. A lot of us drive past it. Our kids played baseball there, and a lot of us don't realize, but that field was directly caused by this event. Right after this happened, they pushed for Gardner Field. Gardner pushed for it, and within 3 years, Gardner Field is created. 3 years after this event. At the same time, within 1 year, Denville builds 7 new playgrounds in its town. The Denville PAL, the Police Athletic League, is created literally months. Actually, before even this trial is completely over, they already created the PAL league, which has a tremendous amount of kids join. They decide to create a PAL league for girls as well. The Little League baseball only went to like 8 years old, up to 1953. In 1953, the Little League met and decided we need to extend this for teenagers as well. They need to be involved. And Denville Rotary gets more involved. It's this idea of Santaland comes out, a decade or so after. The idea is that let's make Denville a family-friendly community. And I didn't realize how many of those positive things stem directly from such a negative event. And I thought it was very important to mention that. As for the rest of the remainder of the story, the boys that were involved, they went to trial. And at the end of the day, only the 22-year-old winds up being trialed for murder because he's the only one that's not a teenager. Everybody else, most of them were sent to juvie, and he's tried for murder, and he goes to prison. He goes to prison for 8 years, and I don't know if he goes longer. I can't find him. So out of the 13 involved, I was able to locate 10 of them. Actually, no, 10. I was able to locate 10 of them. 2 I could not find. The 22-year-old being one of them. He goes to prison and then he disappears. I actually, since the book was already printed, I think I did find him, and I think he changed his name and moved to Alabama, to be very honest with you, but it was too late to put it in the book at that point. One, as of last time I checked, one of these 13 is still alive. 2 I could not find, and the remainders have passed since. Some wound up going by different last names, but for the most part, they didn't. For the most part, 12 of these guys returned back home. By November, when this was over, they all went back to school, and they just went back about their business. And I think that, when I was thinking about how could 1,000 copies of one newspaper disappear, how can this be so hidden for 70 years? I think even at the time, and I try to place that in historical context, I think even at the time there was a certain stigma, about being gay, about being a teenager and talking to your parents about issues. And regardless of what decade we're in, the person that came to this town was a pedophile. It was just somebody that spent time in jail for being a pedophile. So I think our town was very torn at the time because while these boys committed murder, and again, as I keep on saying, 13 is a very misleading number. While some of these boys participated in this event, some of the people in town thought, well, were they trying to protect the town? I mean, it was such a weird moral line that I think the best thing for the town, they believed at the time, was to just kind of bury it. And they did. They buried it really, really well. And what's unfortunate is I've actually spoken to some of the family members of these 13 boys since when this book, when the news of this book started coming out. I was contacted by a few of them, and I have spoken to a few of them. And for some of them, I'm not saying all of them, a few of them, it is almost like a relief in a sense, because I feel kind of I think it's unfortunate that a lot of people lived with this and passed this on, lived their whole lives with this event and passed it on to their kids and their kids and kind of tried their best for 7 years to really hide it and hide behind it. And I think that if the event perhaps was addressed for what it was in 1953, then perhaps the families as well as those involved could have moved on. As opposed to kind of festering it and festering and festering. And the rumors in town are still there. I mean, again, I wouldn't have known about this had I not interviewed people in town. And I felt like the rumors have kind of grown past the reality of what really transpired here. And when I put this I want to say to paper, but obviously I use the word processor. When I started typing this, I felt that it was almost like bringing something back that perhaps should have just been addressed at the time, and hopefully alleviating some of maybe even vindicating some people that have lived their whole lives in shame for something that had happened. And again, it's not an easy topic by any means. I mean, at the end of the day, a man was murdered, regardless of whether he was a good man or not good man, but there's a murder that is committed. So when I wrote this, I try to be as unbiased as I possibly could and as objective as I possibly could, and just kind of use my training as a historian to tell not just a story but a history of our town. The person that was killed, their family was actually a very known family in the state that they were from, and they did not come to the court at all. They did not come to defend their son. And I talked about that in the book as well because of the stigma of the fact that, he was gay. And that was something you did not talk about in 1950s. And he was someone that spent years in prison for child molestation. So again, they were kind of they barely even came and got his body. The car itself was actually dragged over to Denville Garage, which was right in the center of town. And it was there for a while under a tarp. A lot of kids would run over there and kind of look at it and try to check it out. So yeah, I mean, I guess that's my story of the Denville 13. But if anyone has any questions, I would be more than glad to answer them. Anybody? Somebody? No questions?
If anyone has questions, you can unmute yourselves and ask away.
I have a question.
Shoot.
Did you have the opportunity to connect with the one boy of the 13 that is still alive?
I did not have the opportunity. The person that the only indication I had of this person that was alive was from like 2 years ago, right? So the person I haven't been able to confirm that this person is still alive, but I know this person was still alive as of 2 years ago, and I was unable to really locate them per se directly. I knew of them, but not to that extent where I could locate them. The reason I was able to find the other 10 is because I was able to confirm their obituaries. This person, there was no obituary, and they were still alive in 2018. But again, that's almost 3 years ago now. So I really don't know if they're still alive. Perhaps they might be, or they might not be. Anybody else?
Yeah, I just had one observation.
Shoot.
Was that I found it interesting. That's the dog. Sorry.
It's okay.
She has an observation apparently. She liked your book. I thought it was interesting that they talked in the book. You talk about it's kind of the same issues that pop up, like you talked about in the 40s during World War II. That the truancy and the larceny, like all the things that were going on, and had to do with, there's some indication that because, say the dads were at war and the moms were at work. Then you get to the 50s and it's, the post-war era, and kids were bored because there was nothing to do. I don't think any of that's changed. Kids are still bored with nothing to do, no matter what. I found that interesting, and also you hit on the lake communities. As a person that doesn't live in a lake community, we joined one at one point because we were allowed to. They had an opening, but I still think to this day a little bit of if you're in a lake community or if you're not, because there is still stuff for that. The swim teams and the various things that the lake communities do. That you have Cook's Pond, which helps, because that's for anyone else who's not in a lake community. But I think some of the same issues have repeated themselves probably in the 40s and the 50s. And I'm sure there was stuff going on in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. So I found the book really enjoyable. And I thought it was just, outside of the, heinous act of murder. And obviously you can't excuse that, but a lot of the same things, repeat themselves.
Awesome. Thanks. The book itself, I hope it comes across. My intent does come across that, I'm not trying to, make this into a Netflix documentary. This is a story of our town ultimately. And I hope that it's sincere enough and it comes across as such. Kevin, you had a question? I'm sorry. Oh, I don't hear you. It says you're unmuted, but I can't hear you. I don't know why.
I have a question.
Go
I
ahead.
had not heard of your book until I saw here on the library that you were giving this talk. Can you tell me where I could get your book?
Yeah, so the book itself is available right now. It's available everywhere. It's available currently in town. It's available at the Smoke Shop right in the center of town. It's also available at Ray and Judy's Book Stop in Rockaway.
Oh, okay.
But also, it's also available on Amazon. It's in every Barnes and Nobles in New Jersey. Actually, I got an email today that it's on the shelves at every Barnes and Nobles. I wanted to go check one out just so I could see my book in Barnes and Nobles. But the weather kind of didn't cooperate. So it's also available at Target, Walmart. It's pretty much anywhere books are sold. It's a pretty big publisher that's publishing it.
Okay, great.
Peter,
Thank
I
you.
have a question.
Yep.
I just need you to clarify. Did all 13 boys stand trial, or was it just the 22-year-old?
They all stood trial. They all went to trial.
Oh,
However,
okay.
most of them were dismissed during the trial and sent over to juvenile. So their cases were heard, but the verdict was changed from, a lot of times it was changed from murder, which was the initial title. They were switched to manslaughter or conspiracy, and they were all referred to juvenile. So ultimately, while they're all stood trial, the 22-year-old wound up going back on trial again for a changed, what's the word I'm looking for? Well, now for murder, for second-degree murder.
And did the younger boys spend any time in juvenile
They
detention?
did. Some of them did. Yep. Some of them were told. Actually, the prosecutor asked for them to stay. One of the 14-year-old boys was actually very involved in planning of this, and regardless of his age, he
Mm.
was one of the, you might say, masterminds behind the whole thing. So
Oh.
he did spend time. He did spend time behind bars between the actual between the arrest and the trial.
But most of them, you said, went back to school.
Yeah,
and
most of them are back to school. Yeah.
Interesting.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yep, of course.
Yeah, hi. The book was great. I enjoyed it. From what I remember, the 22-year-old, I believe, was the one that used the soda bottle.
Mm-hmm.
But I also thought, I remember that he had also been in prison before.
Yep. And the person that was 22, I got a vibe. This was, again, after the book was already written. After I spoke to some of the members of the families of these guys, the 22-year-old was very much, if any of us remember watching Back to the Future, and we think of Biff,
Yeah.
the bully.
Mm.
That was the vibe I got. He was Biff. He was the bully that kind of, you almost didn't want to go against him if you hung out in that circle because, he would bully you in a sense. A couple of the other boys also had actually records as well. And a couple of the other boys, because I do research all the time. I have a column in a local paper, Denville Life. So I write for the Denville Historical Society. I write an article about Denville's history every month. And so I continue to do research on Denville. But two of the boys were again arrested like 5 years later after the event. Yeah, they were arrested for theft. So some of them might not have learned their lesson per se. But I think that I definitely cover in the later chapter of the book that a lot of them went on to be good citizens. A lot of them went on to kind of do really good things in life, which that kind of stems from that forgiveness part. And it's hurtful because it is hurtful for I assume the book is very hurtful, but for somebody, I felt that it almost takes the weight of a lot of people's shoulders in a sense that we could kind of. I didn't want this to become, because right now everyone's into true crime this, true crime that, and I felt like if this was going to come out, it perhaps should come out from someone that's involved with the Historical Society, someone that lives in this town, and someone that, at the end of the day, I think that I really have our town's best interests in mind. So, okay.
Sorry.
No, go ahead, Andrea. Go ahead. What's up?
No, it's just after reading some of the stuff in the book, like, did you ever get a sense of like how the boys were able to do that, like how they were able to accomplish it? Because, it just seems like, did the boys go and confront him at the beach? And like, did you ever, or
the vibe I got based on their testimonies, he suggested the beach, and he actually suggested Lover's Lane. And they kind of knew he was going to suggest Lover's Lane because that's where kids went to hook up. So they kind of knew he was going to, it's almost like they knew he was going to suggest that. Perhaps the vibe I got is that this may not have been the first time he took a 14-year-old boy to Lover's Lane in Denville that summer.
Oh, yeah. Because it just seemed very like, did the boys approach him? Did he approach the boys? Like there was definitely intent there, right? But it just kind of seemed to, like, he took them to the bar. So obviously that wasn't in the boys' plan.
Yeah, that was not part of the plan. Yeah, that was, did you read the book? You read the book, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, they were kind of freaked out when he took him to the bar because that was not expected. One of the boys actually ran out of the bar to the people waiting in the car, and he's like, I don't know what's going on, but we're still here. And they're like, okay, well, let us know what's going on. Meanwhile, you have the car with the other teenagers sitting in Lover's Lane in the dark, in the woods. Like, there's no cell phones, so these guys are like, what's going on? Like,
It just
Um,
seems like they came up with this idea and yet he was like fully engaged in it as well. Like it just seemed too
Yeah.
easy, you
Yeah.
know?
Makes sense. It was, I guess it was odd. I didn't think about it like that, but yeah, it makes sense.
I just,
Yeah.
as I read the book, I kept thinking like, wait, who is suggesting this? What was like, I mean, obviously we weren't there, so we don't know
Yeah.
like how the conversation went down, but like, how did they approach him? How did they get him to,
So they
agree?
they saw him based on the testimonies. They saw him when they hatched the plan. They saw him at the soda shop. This
Right.
was early in the morning, and he came in and tried to pick up one of these boys. And that's when the conversation was started in a sense of, all right, enough is enough with this guy. Like, let's figure something out. And they selected the couple of boys that were 14 to bait him. They purposely selected boys that they considered to be, and this
Young.
is like kind of, like, what's the-
Nerdy.
nerdy, I guess, or kind of like slower per
naive.
se,
Yeah.
like kind of
Oh.
gullible is the word I was looking for.
Or naive, or
Naive is the right word. Yeah. So they kind of selected these boys, and that came out in the trial as well, that the boys they selected was like, hey, these guys are just going to go along with it. So, let's send these guys over to this guy and see what he suggests. And he's like, hey, he suggested going swimming, and he suggested, Lover's Lane. They were supposed to push him towards Lover's Lane, but he suggested it himself. So, it was evident. And if you look, and there's another thing that was really interesting, that was not in any of the testimonies, but was, and I wrote about it in the book. It did come out in the autopsy report, is that he did ejaculate. That wasn't an autopsy report. So he was in a car with that boy for a certain amount of time, and it was not spoken about, nor was it in any of the testimonies. But the what do you call it? Autopsy report was very extensive. I could tell you that. So interesting to read. I'm sorry. Somebody else had a question?
Yeah, that's good.
I also just think it's good
Hey,
they
Peter.
went to, that's the wrong word, that they went to that Lover's Lane. Like if he would have taken him to, you said there's Denville.
There's a few, yeah.
If he doesn't go to one by Route 8 and he goes one somewhere
I think it
else.
was just the idea that might have been the most secluded one.
Okay, yeah, I was just like when you said there was a couple, I was like, ooh,
Yeah.
what if he went to the one where else one was?
Yeah. And it's funny because I found out about the Lover's Lane when I was interviewing folks for World War II. A lot of these ladies were like, "Oh, I was there. I don't want to talk about it, but I used to go to this place." And it was kind of cute. Since talking to them about it. But yeah, no, good point. Good point, Kevin. I think we can hear you now.
Sorry, Peter. I appreciate all this old school Denville here. The story's obviously difficult to tell, difficult to hear, and there's still a lot of old school folks that are going to be picking up this book, and it's going to be bringing up some pretty tough memories to have to relive. I'm just wondering if or if anybody if you're aware of any counseling, for lack of a better term, that the town may be considering offering to help those that are going to be reliving this, whether they read the book or they hear about it at the diner or, on their walks around town, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's actually a great point. So we have a liaison on our Denville Historical Society from the town council, and that's something that I will definitely bring up. That's a great point you just made. So I'm going to most definitely bring that up at our next meeting, which we have in a couple of weeks. Just maybe you're right. Maybe just have something like a phone number to call in a sense, have it available for those that would like to. Yeah. And I've been very open with those that have contacted me, the family members, in the sense that I am sharing files with them that didn't make into the book. I said, hey, listen, my research, it's for you, it deals with your family. So I am more than willing to share that research with them. And I have shared research with quite a few. Just so so they themselves could have more closure, because like I said, I didn't write everything in a book. Some of it I felt that it was not my place to mention in that book. So,
Yes, sir. Understood. I appreciate you taking the time to answer my questions. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you.
So Peter, what I thought was interesting, if I could say so, is how the town was came together to try to figure out who to blame for the young people getting involved in this. It seemed like I've just gotten to the point where they're having all these town meetings at the church, and I noticed that they were quick to blame poor parenting, and it seemed like, a lot of the kids didn't have the supervision. They're going to Paul's Diner at 2 a.m, and I just noticed that once again, they like to blame the parents, but it also seems like perhaps these were kids who, like you said, didn't have the economic security. Maybe their parents were working. There could be other situations happening at their homes that, let them fall victim to getting involved in this. Like they didn't know better.
Yeah. Well, the early portion of the book, I tracked back. And, if you probably recall from the first chapter, Denville had a juvenile delinquency problem in the 40s, a decade before this happened. And what was really interesting about that problem is that was the first time they ever held a town meeting about Denville juvenile. And what shocked the town was that these kids were 8 years old. The kids in the 40s were below 10 years old. These were my son's, 8, and he doesn't know how to tie his shoelaces the right way. I can't imagine some of the, you have 8-year-olds in 1940s that one of them stole a gun and started shooting out windows in Cedar Lake. Another one's setting fire to people's homes. They're stealing things. And it was shocking that these kids were so little, and they blamed it on the fact that this was World War II and parents went to work. And they kind of left kids unattended. And interestingly enough, when you look at Denville's so-called second juvenile problem, delinquency problem in the 50s, ultimately, these aren't necessarily different kids. These are the same kids that just, they're not 8 anymore. They're 18 now. So perhaps all of this stems from really World War II and not saying parents' fault, but maybe the inattentiveness. We're coming out of Great Depression. Yeah, we're coming out of Great Depression, and I did so much research on Denville during the Great Depression. That might be a book one day. I did so much research that when World War II jobs opened up in Denville, people jumped on it. They had to. But like Chief Jenkins pointed out, there were some instances where kids were 5 years old, home alone for 8 hours a day. 5 years old. I can't imagine leaving a 5-year-old for 8 hours a day home alone.
Yeah.
Different times, but
yeah,
that's what happened. So perhaps maybe World War II is to blame for this. Perhaps
it was different. It was, I'm Carol. It was more of an innocent time. I grew up, let's see, late 50s, I guess. I grew up in Bloomfield, which is Essex County in New Jersey. And we would be out from early in the morning. There were just kids on your street and you just played. And some of their mothers never came out to see if the kids wanted to have lunch. It was just a time where you didn't think about crime. It was like more of an innocent time where people just went out and played all day. And it was, you didn't need play dates. You probably hear this stuff all the time, but it's true. It was just a time of innocence, I think, more or less. And probably so many of these young boys had no clue what was going on. They may not even know what a homosexual was. I certainly didn't when I was little. I don't know what they really understood about this guy, except for it was cool to hang out with these older guys, Yeah. I don't know.
A different time. That's for
sure. It really was.
Different time.
Thank you.
No worries. Anybody have anything else? Nope. Maybe. Kind of. No. Okay.
Fascinating.
Well, thank you, Peter. Yeah, it was a great program. I
Excellent.
encourage everybody to check out the book. I know the library is going to be getting a copy shortly. So you can borrow it from us, or you can head on over to the Smoke Shop or Ray and Judy's or any of our local bookstores and pick that up.
Yeah, and I'll donate a couple copies to the library. Probably I'll try to stop by tomorrow.
It's a
I mean, the
great
book,
read.
you know, I'm donating the money from the book to the Denville Historical Society, regardless. So
Oh,
think of it
wow.
this way, you know, if you purchase this book already or you are purchasing it, you're actually helping out the Historical Society.
okay. That's
Erin-
good to know. I'm
you.
glad you mentioned that.
I
Erin's
probably should have
raising her
started off
hand.
with that.
Okay.
Yeah. Hi, Erin.
Hi.
Hello.
I had one last question that you kind of touched on already, but do you plan on writing another book soon? Or are you
Yeah,
working
so,
on something right now?
So believe it or not, I actually the World War II book that started this, because this is a small book. This book was never meant to be a book. You know, this was meant to be something that's written in a binder and left in a museum and turned out to be a book that you guys have read. But I did finish my World War II book, and I actually signed a contract with Arcadia Publishing, and that book comes out on August 9th, and it's about Denville and World War II, and it's double the length of this one. And it is. I laugh because I'm super excited about that one. Like that was always the one that was meant to come out. And it's I was able to essentially collect the history of Denville in World War II, not just of those that fought, but also what the town was like, the experiences of people living in town every single day in World War II. I found pictures. I dug up pictures. People shared pictures with me when I went to their homes before COVID started, and I interviewed them that have never been seen before in the town. And I actually pretty much, I would say 80% of that book is primary documents. They're real firsthand accounts of Denville folks. I have an account from every single theater of World War II of someone that was there in Denville, starting with Pearl Harbor through, like firsthand account from someone from Denville, every single theater of war.
Great.
So that's coming out next, Aaron, in August. And I actually just signed another contract with History Press, who published this. I have a book coming out in December called 58 Days of Terror Over Elizabeth. And it's about 3 airplane crashes that happened in a period of 58 days in Elizabeth, New Jersey, 1951. So I have 3 books coming out in 2020.
Wow.
And I speak up about the Elizabeth book. My husband was born in Elizabeth, and I've heard those stories over and over. I can't wait to read that book.
Awesome. Thanks. Yeah, it's been busy. And again, if you told me a year and a half ago that I'm going to be writing books, I would just be like, that's nice. But yeah, it's kind of all. And the World War II book on Denville also, all proceeds have been signed off to the Historical Society. I'm also not taking any money from that book either. So yeah, I figured let's help the museum out a little bit if I can. Why not? So,
Just
yeah,
to let
thanks, Eric.
everyone know, we have recorded this presentation tonight, so we'll make it available on our website, and you can tell all your friends about it. And thank you for joining us. This was a
Thank
great
you.
program and
Yeah.
some good questions,
I
interesting
will look at the
discussion.
recording. Thank you so much.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, and we have a couple other interesting history presentations coming up on our events page. So if you're interested, Thursday, there's a program on Robin Hood, and we're having a virtual film discussion on the 28th. It's a Sunday, where
Right.
on the film Harriet, about Harriet Tubman.
Oh,
Mhm. Yeah.
So thanks for
And
everybody.
if anyone has any questions, again, please feel free to reach out. You can find me on Facebook. I mean, I'm around town. You could go to denvillemuseum.org. You could email me through there. And like I said, if you know, Kevin, also to answer your previous question, if you know anyone that does want to contact me about some information, of what I know besides what is in the book, if they, feel more comfortable reaching out to you, you could always reach out to me, and I'll be more than happy to kind of help them uncover, whatever they might want to know. The people that contacted me actually did not know most of the stuff that happened because their parents shared just enough with them, and interesting enough, a lot of the ones that I spoke to were not the 4 main ones. There were the kids that lived in shame because they were at a wrong place at a wrong time.
yeah.
So, but yeah, Kevin, yeah, absolutely. You could be like my gateway if anyone needs anything.
Yeah, much appreciated, Peter. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
All right,
Peter.
guys.
Bye-bye. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Have a great night, guys.
Good
I look
writing.
forward to seeing it. Yeah.
All right. Thanks. Hi,
Okay,
Deb.
Thank you.
All right. Bye,
Thanks.
guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Bye.
See ya.